Today we are going to explore a movie that came out in 1980 about a writer who arrives at a hotel where through supernatural means he gets caught up in the hotel's past. Nope, not The Shining, but the other supernatural hotel movie of 1980, Somewhere in Time, which unlike The Shining isn't a horror film but rather a tragic love story. It tells the story of a playwright called Richard, played by Christopher Reeve, who travels to a seaside hotel to clear his head, where he falls in love with a photo of an actress called Elise McKenna, played by Jane Seymour, who stayed in the hotel while performing a play in 1912. Where through the mental power of self-hypnotism, Richard travels back to 1912 to meet the woman of his dreams. But things aren't that easy, as McKenna's overprotective and sinister manager, Robinson, played by Christopher Plummer, will stop at nothing to see that the two don't fall in love. Somewhere in Time is probably, without a doubt, one of the saddest movies I've ever talked about. Seriously, this movie is tragic. But regardless, today I'm going to look into 10 things that you didn't know about Somewhere in Time, the movie that kicked off the 1980s cinematic time travel craze. So, let's check it out.
Is it you?
Yes.
Number 10, based on a book. Somewhere in Time is based on the 1975 novel Bid Time Return, which was written by acclaimed writer Richard Matheson. Matheson has had a long career in writing science fiction, and even wrote several episodes of The Twilight Zone, including Little Girl Lost, which was the inspiration for the movie Poltergeist. It was while on a camping trip with his family and passing through the Piper's Opera House in Nevada that Matheson saw an old picture of an actress called Maud Adams, who was a big Broadway star of the early 1900s. Matheson fell in love with the photo and wondered what if someone else fell in love with the picture and went back in time to see Adams, and this was the genesis for Bid Time Return. In order to write the book, Matheson stayed at the Hotel de Coronado, where the novel actually takes place, and to get himself in the mindset, he even acted out the part of the Richard character in his room where he reclused himself with only his voice recorder as his companion. Number 9. A favour for making Jaws 2. Bid Time Return started its production into movie adaptation in 1976 when producer Stephen Simon found a copy of the book and fell in love with it, and teamed up with Matheson to write a screenplay. Universal Pictures got involved and French director Jean-Os Schwartz was suggested because he had just directed Jaws 2, which was a massive hit sequel-wise. Schwartz fell in love with the novel and immediately got involved in the project, even helping come up with the story's new title, Somewhere in Time. However, as soon as the project got started, it nearly finished, as there was suddenly some resistance from Universal, who felt that the movie wouldn't be very commercial, to which Schwartz held a meeting with the powers that be and basically said to them, "Hey, remember that time I made that impossibly difficult movie Jaws 2 for you guys which made a lot of money? Yeah, don't you think you guys owe me a favour?" So it was because of that that Universal put Somewhere in Time back on track. It did, however, get its budget cut down to $4 million, of which before it was double that. Number 8. Differences from the book. As with all book-to-movie adaptations, there are many interesting differences between Somewhere in Time and its original novel Bid Time Return. The most glaring difference is the fact that in the novel, the Richard character is diagnosed with a brain tumour, and the novel even hints that his time travel experience was a hallucination fever dream caused by his tumour. It is the tumour that eventually kills the Richard character after his experience, whereas in the movie, Richard has no tumour and dies of a broken heart. In the film, Richard travels from 1980 to 1912, whereas in the book he goes from 1971 to 1896. The movie takes place at the Grand Hotel Michigan, unlike the book which takes place in the Hotel de Coronado in California. There are actually tons of differences, but the one I find the most fascinating is the character Robinson, who to me in both book and film is the most interesting character, thanks to his mysterious all-knowing knowledge. In the book it's described that he's psychic, But maybe it's just me, but in the movie I always felt like there are subtle little suggestions that Robinson is also a time traveller, who has gone back in time to protect McKinnon's career from Richard, of which got destroyed after their brief love affair. I mean, think about it, he even had prior knowledge of Richard's arrival before Richard arrived. In fact, it's learned that he even warned Elise about him, which is why Elise asked Richard, "Is it you?" And later in the movie, he even tells Richard to his face that he knows exactly who he is. To me, it couldn't be clearer. Maybe Robinson was someone from the future who also saw Elise's picture and fell in love with it, and did research on her, and also discovered that Elise was researching the time travel theory, and thus he also hypnotized himself back in time, but went back further to become her manager and protect her and her career from this mysterious stranger, who as a result, when you think about it, did really tear her life apart and reduce her to being a lonely recluse. Either way, it's just a theory. What if I was to also tell you that the 1979 coin that sent Richard back to 1980 could have been put in Richard's pocket by Robinson, and thus breaking his hypnosis and sending him back? After all, after Richard is tied up in the barn, we don't see Robinson again. Did the coin also send him back to when he came from? Number 7. Casting process. Christopher Reeve was offered the part of Richard because at that time he had made it big starring as Superman. In fact, the very year Somewhere in Time came out, Superman 2 was also released. Reeve was interested in the role because at that time the parts he was mainly being offered were macho action movie roles, but Reeve was keen to show his acting chops rather than his muscle. His biggest reservations was making the time travel aspect believable, but he took a leap of faith and went with it. According to director Genos Schwartz, former Bond girl Jane Seymour was cast in the role of Elise McKinnon because she was the only actress who answered no when asked during her audition if she had ever been in love. It then also became apparent that she had amazing chemistry with Reeve, and it's that chemistry which gives the movie its power. Christopher Plummer took on the role of Robinson because he has a love for time travel stories, and also because of the complexities of the character. Also, a then unknown William H. Macy stars as an extra in the party scene at the start of the movie, and the story's writer Richard Matheson also has a cameo in the film. Number 6. Tragedy of the music. So the question is, who could compose Somewhere in Time and recapture the movie's sadness and raw emotions through its movie score? Well, who else better to turn to than James Bond film composer John Barry, of course. Barry got involved because he was friends with Jane Seymour, and she asked him to score the picture, and after watching it, he wanted to do it, meaning Barry would be composing Somewhere in Time as opposed to the next James Bond film For Your Eyes Only. What adds to the sadness of the music is that not too long before, both Barry's parents had sadly died, and Somewhere in Time was his first score since their passing. I believe this probably lent to the tragedy of the music. Barry himself said that he doesn't normally write like that. It was nice that the composer got to express his emotions through scoring a sad movie like Somewhere in Time, rather than just going off to do another Bond film business as usual. Number 5. Release. Upon its release, Somewhere in Time made $9.7 million on a $4 million budget. So although it made its money back, it still wasn't a huge earner for Universal and was considered a disappointment. The critics at the time were also harsh to Somewhere in Time. When talking about Somewhere in Time, famed critic Roger Ebert said, "Isn't it a little futile to travel 68 years backward into time for a one-night stand?" And further stated that the time travel aspect is, quote, "a bunch of mumbo-jumbo that no one really cares about," end quote. Clearly, I think in this situation he was wrong. So why didn't the movie perform too well? Well, there are two theories. One being problems with its marketing, on the account that there was an actors' strike at the time, and neither Reeve or Seymour could talk about the movie or give interviews. The other being just a general lack of audience interest in watching the movie, which once again is a shame. I don't know, maybe back then people were too busy going to see The Elephant Man instead. Thankfully, as time has gone on, Somewhere in Time has developed a huge fan base, making it a cult movie. Number 4. Conventions. Thanks to VHS, Somewhere in Time has become a treasured classic, with an adoring fan base that holds a convention once a year in October at the Grand Hotel, the location where Somewhere in Time was filmed. There have even been several occasions where members of the cast and crew also attend the Somewhere in Time conventions at the Grand Hotel. The celebrations include screenings of the movie, as well as discussion boards and an Edwardian costume ball. Heck, the movie is so damn loved, a plaque was put up in the location where the characters Richard and Elise meet for the first time was filmed. A few years ago, a very nice person called Joe Addy reached out to me. Addy worked on the movie as an extra for 3 weeks, and is also president of the Somewhere in Time Fan Society, also known as International Network of Somewhere in Time Enthusiasts. I love that name. As well as publishing an elegant fan magazine. And she was kind enough to gift me with some of these magazines, as well as a DVD of a convention in 1994, in which Christopher Reeve was in attendance. These are wonderful pieces that I keep in my personal collection, and very delighted to own them. Addie herself is full of rich knowledge of the movie, and also remained friends with Reeve till his passing, and is still good friends with Jane Seymour, and her love and passion for the movie is quite remarkable. Number 3. Movie posters in time. During the 80s, there was a big craze of time-travelling movies with the likes of Time Bandits, The Terminator, Back to the Future, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And it kind of started with Somewhere in Time. So the big question is, how do you make a poster out of a movie that is one part period piece love story and one part science fiction time travel caper? The main poster that was used was this one, which is very somber and has an old photo feel about it, what with its use of greys and browns, and looks as haunting as the movie. A more animated version of this poster was also put together, which uses a full colour illustration of Jane Seymour, along with this strange doorway into another dimension going on here, giving it a kind of Twilight Zone feel. Then there was this one, which focuses on the scene where Richard and Elise are about to get their funky love going on, giving it a more sexy approach. Most home media releases have gone with this image as the cover, which is an on-set photo of Reeve and Seymour sitting by the bay near the Grand Hotel when they're on their date. And this one definitely goes for a more period piece look. It doesn't look exactly science fiction-y or time travel-y. I don't know, personally I prefer the original movie posters, to be honest. Number 2, Titanic connection. Whether intentional or coincidental, there are actually a lot of similarities between Somewhere in Time and James Cameron's Titanic movie. Besides the fact that they are both tragic love stories, the parallels between the two movies are striking, so here are a few of them. Both movies start in modern times, before the main story shifts to the past. Both movies start off with the main female protagonist as an elderly lady. Both movies feature a MacGuffin that connects the past to the present. In Somewhere in Time it's a fob watch, which, by the way, wasn't in the novel, and in Titanic it's the Heart of the Ocean diamond necklace. Both movies take place in 1912, but considering Titanic actually sank in 1912, I'll let that pass. In both movies, the female love interest is of upper-class nobility, whereas the male love interest is seen as a peasant who actually has to convince and fight for the love of the upper-class female protagonist. In both movies, the male leads are befriended by a large-framed, eccentric woman. In both movies, there is a jealous rival who will stop at nothing to prevent our main lovers from being together. Both movies see the male lead die in the climax, and if all these similarities weren't enough to convince you, both movies end with a scene of the main lovers being reunited in heaven. All these similarities will leave you scratching your head and wondering if James Cameron was a massive fan of Somewhere in Time. Bonus entry: Other timely snippets. Although the idea of travelling in time through hypnotism may seem strange, it's not entirely an original idea confined to Somewhere in Time. In the book it's based on, Bid Time Return, Richard researches a book called An Experiment with Time by aeronautical engineer and philosopher J.W. Dunn. And this was a real book that was published in 1927 about the theory of travelling through time by the power of consciousness. Although Somewhere in Time had an underwhelming box office performance in the States, it was actually a big hit in Hong Kong, and was in movie theatres in that part of the world for 18 months, making it one of the biggest movies in that location. According to IMDb, Christopher Reeves' agent was given the script for Somewhere in Time to pass on to Reeve, but when told of the fee that Reeve would receive, his agent refused to inform Reeve of the script, feeling that the fee was too low, especially for a man who just starred as Superman. So Somewhere in Time's producer, Stephen Deutsch, slipped the script under Reeves' hotel door, and Reeve read it and loved it and agreed to star in the movie. IMDb further adds that Reeve also accepted the role to get out of another role that he was being offered at that time, which was for a movie about Vikings. It does seem that while making the movie, Reeve and Seymour grew a strong fondness of each other and had a powerful bond behind the camera. In fact, Reeve had an airplane which was parked on the island where the Grand Hotel was, and during the shoot, Reeve and Seymour would often sneak out and go on plane trips and fly to Canada. Somewhere in Time does have a spiritual sequel of sorts in the form of the book What Dreams May Come, which was also written by Richard Matheson. Matheson claims that if Somewhere in Time is the story of love which transcends time, then What Dreams May Come is the story of love that transcends death. And yeah, What Dreams May Come is an equally haunting love story, which itself was adapted into a movie in 1998 which starred Robin Williams, who incidentally in real life was a close friend with Christopher Reeve. Now the movie was a financial dud but did win an Academy Award for special effects. And there was an actual sequel to Somewhere in Time called Memoirs of Elise by author David Earl Gurney, and it's actually more of a sequel to the movie than the book, as it follows Elise McKenna's life after Richard vanishes, and how she eventually finds him and tracks him down, where she says the ever-haunting words, "Come back to me." Number 1. Afterlife Imitating Art. In the movie's tragic conclusion, we see the Richard character literally die of sadness and grief, where thanks to camera work, it suggests that Richard is having an out-of-body experience before moving on to heaven where Elise is waiting for him. It may seem corny by today's standards, but still more deep and powerful than the book's ending where Richard succumbs to a brain tumour. However, what makes this scene even more powerful is that Christopher Reeve stated that after his tragic horse riding accident, he was given a drug which he was allergic to, causing him to flatline for 50 seconds, and had a very similar out-of-body experience, where he could feel himself floating out of his body and looking down on himself, very similar to what was seen in the film, until he returned realizing that his time was not up yet. Reeve sadly did pass away in 2004, making this scene even more tragic and haunting in modern viewings, as it's a reminder that the world lost a very talented actor. So that was my look into Somewhere in Time, the haunting and tragic love story that revolves around the mysteries of time travel. Check it out, it's a wonderful film, but keep in mind it's not for the faint of heart. And it is heavy viewing, not a simple easy movie to watch on a Sunday afternoon, but definitely a rewarding one to watch when you feel like watching a more involved movie. Anyway, I'm Minty, and if you ever find yourself time travelling, then make sure you don't have any coins from 1979 in your pockets. It'll only end in tragedy. See ya!